So there's some things that I want to point out in these verses that we just read. Some things that might give us an idea, some of the characteristics of Lucifer and kind of why he went from where he is to where he was to where he is now. So if we go back to Ezekiel, in the 28th chapter of Ezekiel, it mentions that it says, let me quote this, "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." That makes you wonder, if you wonder what he was like in the beginning, it says that he was full of wisdom and he's perfect in beauty. So it makes me wonder about what he's like today. Is it possible that he's still full of wisdom? Is it still beautiful? Something to think about. Anyway, let's go on. Come back to that later. It says every precious stone was your covering. It mentions all these precious stones, and these were part of his tapestry. These are what he was made up of. So he was actually a very, very beautiful being in heaven. It says that he had timbrels. It mentions the workmanship of your timbrels, it says, and pipes. That's what leads people to believe a lot of times that he was possibly like a worship leader, something to do with music in heaven. And music's very important in heaven. It's also why it's not an accident that churches today, well, churches all throughout time since the beginning, or even Judaism back in pre-Christ days, music has always been an integral part of religion and part of Christianity and Judaism. Like I said, it's always been a very important part. The reason is because we're mirroring what goes on in heaven. So in heaven, he had these instruments built into his body. So somehow, in some way, we don't understand it all, but Lucifer was very related to music in whatever way that might be. So let me move on. It also mentions that he was created. I've already told you that, but it says right there in verse 13, Ezekiel 28:13, it says, "On the day you were created." He was created. He doesn't want people to think that. He wants people to think that he's as God, which he's not. It says, "You were the anointed cherub who covers." So he was the one, or one of the ones, that covered God's throne. God doesn't need protection. He doesn't need covered that way. But in a way, it's kind of like is God's right-hand man. Maybe you could think of it like that. Somebody who was right there at his beck and call. So he had a very, very important place in heaven. And you can understand if you were very close to somebody so important, like in our position, if you were very close to the President of the United States, for example, you might think after a while, I'm kind of special. I'm kind of important. People should look up to me. Why is it that nobody knows my name, but they know the president? I help him with this. I do that for him, whatever. I reside in the same place that he does. I go wherever he goes. It would be kind of easy for a person to get prideful in that regard. So I guess you can kind of see how this might have happened. Again, this is all speculation. This is just me talking. So let's move on to go down to some more verses here. It says, "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created." So he didn't sin. In the beginning, he didn't sin. It says, "Till iniquity was found in you. You became filled with violence within, and you sinned." So it's interesting that nobody talks a whole lot about violence in regards to sin. A lot of people, when they talk about Sodom and Gomorrah and why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, they want to go first directly to the sexual sin that was going on there, because that was prevalent in the story when we read it. But if you look a little bit closer at that, and also at the time of Noah when God destroyed the earth with the flood, violence is mentioned. So if you go back and you look at that, you'll mention that God did not approve of the violence, and that he destroyed people over that. So where did this violence originate? Where did it come from? It came from Lucifer, according to this verse. It says, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. So it's basically saying that God removed him from that position. So you're no longer going to serve in that position any longer. Then it says in verse 17, "Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom." So remember I said a while ago that he was beautiful and he was wise. Here it says that his wisdom was corrupted. Do you know of any instance where you can think of when somebody was talking in educational format, whatever. Somebody who seemed to be very smart, very intellectual, intelligent, and they say a lot of things that seem to make sense. But when you start really looking into it, it's kind of twisted. It's like what a lawyer does in a courtroom. He has an agenda, and he can take whatever truth, whatever facts there are, and he can twist them, and he can spin it to make it come out his way. That's the way I see it when it comes to this. It says your wisdom was corrupted. So he has a wisdom. He's not stupid. Lucifer is not dumb at all, but he has had his wisdom corrupted. And it says your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You ever see that around? You ever see people who are beautiful, women who are beautiful, men who are beautiful, who put themselves up on a pedestal, who everyone else puts up on a pedestal, and says, "Oh my goodness, you're so gorgeous." Just look at Hollywood. Look at all the entertainment industry. It happens constantly. People, the more beautiful a person is, the more revered they are in our society. So where does all that come from? It comes from here. This was the root. This was the beginning. He was the first one who was beautiful, and because of that, he became vain and conceited and prideful. And because of that, he thought that he should be greater than what he was. He looked at himself in a way that was higher than what he should have. So skipping over to Isaiah 14, which we read also, it says a lot of statements here, or he makes a lot of statements that are beginning with the word I, all about me, right? So he says, you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. When it says stars of God, it doesn't literally mean the stars that we see out in the heavenlies at night up in the sky. Stars represents the beings, the heavenly host, all the population of heaven, if you will. So he is saying that he will exalt his throne above the stars of God. In other words, he's going to be the top dog in heaven. He's going to be over everyone. So the next statement he says is, I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest side of the north. Well, when he says, I will also, that means somebody else is already sitting there, right? It's probably God. So he said, I'm going to get up there on your level. I'm going to be at your level. It says, I will be like the Most High. It doesn't say I will be just under the Most High. I will be a servant of the Most High. It says, I will be like the Most High. But now look at God's response. It says, yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, which is like the pit, death, so on and so forth, the lowest depths of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners? It's really interesting that Christians today look at, or they hear the word devil or Satan or whatever, and they just get freaked out, like he's this almighty, all-powerful being. I know at times there were, I guess when I was a kid and I would learn about this stuff, I sort of looked at it like this, like, well, God is this high, has this much power, and the devil has like this much power. So God can still defeat the devil, but barely. Well, that's not scriptural at all. I don't know why I was taught that or why I learned that, or why I thought that. Maybe it wasn't. I'm not going to blame the fault of the people who taught me that. That was probably just my perception as a child. But I found out after reading the scripture, Satan is simply a heavenly being that was created. He's not the creator. He doesn't have the power of creation. He mimics a lot of the things that God does, and we'll talk more about that as time goes along. He counterfeits pretty much everything that God ever did. He's a wannabe God, if you will. But it's interesting looking at that verse when it says, those who see you will gaze at you and consider, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities? So next time you start getting scared of evil or scared of the devil, remind yourself, there's going to come a day at the end of time in the future when people are going to look at Satan and go, really? This is it? This is the guy? I can't believe we were scared of this thing, this person. Because he's not scary at all. It reminds me a little bit of in the movie The Wizard of Oz years ago, when the great and mighty Oz, they see Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Lion and the Tin Man. They all see this great and mighty Oz. Everyone's scared of him. They think he's this most powerful being. And then all of a sudden, the curtain gets pulled back, and the guy's like, don't mind the guy behind the curtain, right? Because they found out it was just this little mere man that was doing all this. It was all smoke and mirrors. And that's what we'll see at the end of time. So those are the things that I wanted to bring out from these scriptures for you today.